Today we'll talk about some isolated extras for upper body. These don't quite fall into our broad categories of push and pull, but they're still movements worth knowing about. Usually they're in the category of what you might call prehab, little things we do just to condition the tissues to stop you from getting injured, to make sure your development is balanced from your training and perhaps from your sedentary activities as well. We'll work on some rotator cuff stuff, a few different variations of isolation work just to work on weak points or injured points if you do need to strengthen up a isolated area.
Alright, kicking it off here with Cuban rotations. So this is a really direct way to train your external rotators. Common injury site is the rotator cuff. And this is a pretty heavy load for those little muscles. I did not start by any means by using 20 kilos for this one. And you can see my elbow is actually dropping a tiny bit, so I'm not isolating it perfectly. You could do this with really light little dumbbells or just with an empty stick, just working on the range. Here's another option to work that range is something like a muscle snatch. I'm getting a little bit of help from my hips, but I'm muscling it up with my external rotators and my arms working on the rotator cuff there. Left shoulder's very tight on this day. And the next miscellaneous upper body movement is the wrist curl. You could do this in multiple directions, you could brace in different ways. These are small isolated movements that can be handy for addressing a weak point. Bicep curls, tricep extensions. If you have something that you need to target, these smaller isolated bodybuilding derivative movements can be useful. You don't necessarily need a dumbbell. You can use the ground. Here I am working some wrist extension or wrist flexion. Also a bit of a stretch for the knuckles. Get ulnar and radial deviation. I did a lot of these after dislocating my hands a while ago. There's a heap of different variations, different weird push-ups you can do to strengthen up the hands in different ways. They should all fall under this category. Lateral raises, this is another one from bodybuilding. It's a good one for your deltoids. You can do bent over dumbbell laterals. This one will work a bit more rear deltoids as well as some of the stuff around the scapulars. Again, isolation has its place. You can fit in some of these little gaps that we might have if all your training is the big, strong prime mover muscles in big, complicated compound movements. Here's dumbbell flies. I think this is useful as a stretch as much as anything else. Big favorite of Arnold to give him massive pecs, but I prefer them more as a stretch for people with tight pecs. Here we have a straight arm pull down. This is a great one to isolate shoulder extension. It's a lot of work for the lats and a little bit of work for the triceps just to get the elbows straight there. You could do that standing to get a different angle, or you could do it seated. At the end there I showed how that angle might be a bit more relevant for the deadlift. I'm going to move this thing down, if I can get it out. There we go. I'll move it down so you can see how relevant that shoulder extension is for the deadlift. In order to keep the bar close to your legs, you need to really pull like that, not let it come away from you. So sometimes I use this one as a drill just to teach people how their lats should be activating during a deadlift or some other pull off the floor, as you can see there, in order to keep the weight close. Okay, and on the rings, here's another variation. It's a bit of fun. You can practice transitions for a muscle up. Something like a muscle up would really blur the lines between a pull and a push. Eventually, it's the sort of thing you can build up to. If I was doing a true muscle up there, I would have started at the bottom of a chin up. It's neither a push nor a pull, but it's filling in some gaps that we might have if all we were doing was chin ups and dips. Here I'm demonstrating a pullover. Now, is this a pec exercise? Is this a shoulder stretch? Is it a lat exercise or a tricep exercise? The answer to all of the above might be yes. Even your abs might be working just to keep your pelvis and your rib cage stable. I really like it as a bit of a stretch. Old-time exercises used to call the pullover a way of stretching your rib box. I think what they meant was that it helped your posture a little bit by stretching out your pecs and your lats. Just keep in mind that when we are doing these isolated movements, we do want to isolate the targeted muscle. So if I'm flailing around while I do my lateral raises and bicep curls, I'm not achieving the goal that I'm after. It's really easy to overemphasize the importance of these more isolated movements. It's really easy to get sucked into novelty and find yourself doing stupid, irrelevant things in the name of maybe filling in gaps and novelty and getting some weird conditioning in. All of these can have their place, that's fine, but it's worth remembering that the basics are the basics for a reason. As novel and fun as it might be to swing a dumbbell around 1,000,000 times, and as much as that might stretch or condition my shoulder, it's not going to replace our basic important movements, being our squat, push, pull, and hinge, and loaded carry. Remember, the sixth movement here, trying to balance a dumbbell on my chin, is probably less important than those are.